Boris Johnson says he has to reserve the right to tighten restrictions as the spread of Omicron sees COVID cases surge across the country.
Yeah, the Prime Minister resisted announcing any new measures before Christmas, but said ministers were, in his words, looking at all kinds of things. Joining us now is Minister for the Cabinet Office, Stephen Barclay. Stephen Barclay, thanks for joining us this morning. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's a lot of mixed messages. I mean, on one hand, we're hearing from government, you don't need to do anything, don't change your Christmas. Her Majesty the Queen has decided to pretty much cancel her Christmas, what she would normally do at Sandringham. So many mixed messages. It's almost left to people to decide. It feels that in the middle of a pandemic, when we have got an extraordinary high rate of a variant, that is a very dangerous situation to be in when we are about to get the most social part of the year, when people will be meeting up more than any other part of the year. It's a bit dangerous, don't you think?
Well, there is much uncertainty about the new variant. There's much we don't know in terms of the hospital admissions, the effectiveness of the booster. There's a time lag on the data, for example. But there is a very clear message to viewers, which is the best thing we can all do, is to have our boosters, and people have been responding in huge numbers to that. We saw over 1 million people jabbed on Saturday alone with their boosters or first and second jabs. And that is a single thing that we can all do that would make the most difference as we go into Christmas.
Why are we not following the science anymore on this one? Because I believe you're one of those who are personally opposed to introducing more lockdown restrictions. But when we look at what SAGE are saying on this, they're warning that daily hospital admissions could reach 3,000 without further restrictions. Professor John Edmonds has said delaying restrictions could result in millions more infections, and it could be set to overwhelm the NHS. So why is it then that that's being overruled and people like you are making the decision that actually let's not have restrictions just yet?
Well, it's a very fair question, and we are looking extremely closely at the science. That's why we had such a long cabinet meeting looking at that data yesterday. Of course, in terms of the hospital admissions data, there's a 2 to 3 week lag between when people get an infection and when they present at hospital. So we need to look at that. We need to look at that in the round in terms of the new treatments that are available, the effectiveness of the booster, how the infection rates are different in different parts of the country. For example, we're seeing more Omicron in London compared to some other regions. So we're looking very closely at that data. But we've also got to recognise, of course, that there's a very significant economic cost. Many of your viewers will be thinking about their businesses, about the impact on those businesses of any further restrictions. And so we need to look at these decisions in the round. And as you say, look at that data. But of course, there is considerable uncertainty about that data. And that is why we're working with the scientists on it.
But the biggest problem you have now, Stephen Barclay, as a government is authority. You know, what you really need at a time like this is authority. And now the latest counts, and I don't know, I can't keep up, 13 different parties, gatherings, whatever you want to call them. The latest one now, cheese and wine, in the gardens of Downing Street in May 2020. The simple thing is, Mr. Barclay, that people sat at home will be thinking, why should I listen to a word that man is saying? Why should I listen to a word? Well, the government is saying they just do what they want to anyway. It is one rule for them and one rule for us.
Well, as you said a moment ago, we're looking very closely at the data, and I think it's the data that people are particularly interested in terms of what the consequences of the new Omicron variant are, to what extent that is driving through into hospital admissions. We've seen through the booster campaign significant uptake, particularly in those most at risk of hospital admissions. And what we're therefore doing is weighing up the data question in terms of the significant economic damage that further restrictions would involve versus the spread of the variant.
I appreciate it, but my question was, and you know what the question is, it's like when you break the rules and you break restriction rules, why should anybody listen to your plans on restrictions anyway? I mean, what did you make of this picture that we all see? I mean, we've heard quite a mixed response to this. I mean, Dominic Raab was out and about yesterday saying, well, it wasn't a work meeting. Then he said, no, it was a work meeting. It was drinks after a work meeting. Couldn't quite make his mind up. Boris Johnson said that, well, they were talking about work, so that makes it a work meeting. What do you make of it? What's your view on what that is?
Well, I mean, I recognise that the British public have made huge sacrifices in response to the pandemic, and there's been considerable anger that's been understandable around, for example, the photo of CCHQ gathering or the video from the press suite. Now, in terms of number 10, there is an investigation that will be carried out by Sue Gray. She is an extremely respected independent senior figure, and she will look at all of these issues. So absolutely get the public concern on this. What we're focused on in Cabinet and the discussion that we had in Cabinet is how do we maximise the booster campaign? How do we ensure we have sufficient testing? We've got more testing capacity than any other country in Europe per capita. We've had a huge number of tests distributed. So we're getting the tests out, we're getting the boosters out, and we're looking extremely closely at that hospital admissions data, which is the key issue that will affect so many businesses thinking about their plans as we go into Christmas.
Sorry to interrupt. I know that you say, you've taken on board that people are upset over this, but there is a lot of defensive-ness, isn't there, on behalf of the government over these gatherings, over accusations of exactly what was going on. Why is it that you can't just hold your hands up and say, look, we know this looks bad, we've got this investigation going into it? Because there was so much upset from people, especially when they contrasted what they were doing in May last year versus what it seemed the government was doing. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures that people were tweeting, but we had one photo and someone was saying, this is my son seeing his nanny through a window. It broke my heart and I'm angry now over what happened. And another picture of a woman and Stephen says, this is the last photo I have of my mum alive in May 2020. She was living alone with a serious illness. When she suggested sitting 2 metres apart in her garden, I said, better not. It's against the rules. There is so much upset from people, and that doesn't seem to be sufficiently acknowledged over the amount of seeming rule-breaking that was going on in the government versus what the rest of the country were doing.
Well, Charlotte, I am recognising that there were considerable sacrifices made and that there is considerable upset, as you have said, and that is why we have an investigation through Sue Gray, and she is someone that is hugely respected and will investigate this matter extremely rigorously. What the Cabinet was focused on yesterday was the key issue of getting our boosters out, getting our testing capacity out, and really analysing the data in terms of hospital admissions, which is, I think, the key issue moving forward.
You keep on avoiding the issue here. How do you think people think, those people that Charlotte has just quoted on Twitter, lots of other people, how do you think they think when Boris Johnson asked about this, rather than say, sorry, we got this wrong, his defence is, well, people were talking. Let's just play that clip again so you get it up clear. This is what Boris... Rather than just say sorry, instead he tried to defend it.
Those were people at work. Those were meetings of people at work talking about, this is where I live and it's where I work. Those were meetings of people at work talking about work.
So the point is, Mr. Barclay, are we saying that people could have partied as long as they were talking about work?
Well, I'm saying the Prime Minister's answered the question there. There is an investigation into that through Sue Gray. But the key issue that we are focused on as a government is what are the next steps that we need to take. That is particularly around, as I say, the booster campaign. And that was the heart of the discussion that we had as a Cabinet yesterday.
OK, and quick word also, because people are going to want to know, when restrictions are likely to come in. Do you think that they'll be in before New Year's Eve? And also for the hospitality industry, they're kind of feeling it's a lockdown by stealth at the moment. They're desperate to hear news of what measures might be put in place to help them.
That is a very fair point, and I'm acutely aware that within the hospitality sector in particular, people have seen a marked change from Plan B, from the behaviour change that has resulted in many cancellations in bookings, and that is why the Chancellor has been speaking very closely with the industry, had a series of calls with business leaders, in particular in the hospitality sector yesterday evening. He will be saying more about that later today. So we're very aware of that. We need to obviously understand the distinction between some of the short-term issues and some of the longer-term issues. There are, of course, existing measures that are already in place, such as on business rates, on VAT relief that run through to March. So there are those existing measures, but we're also aware, as the Chancellor has recognised, that there are impacts on businesses through Plan B, and he is discussing that with the industry and has been doing so in recent days. Just
very quickly, how many households will you be celebrating Christmas with yourself this Christmas, Stephen Barclay, just as somebody in the cabinet, so we can
many
get
families up and down the country. So my mother-in-law, my mother's parents will join us, but other members of the family will not. I won't see my own parents this Christmas, and I think many people will take a cautious approach. But the key thing we can all do, both for our families and for our loved ones, is to get the booster, and that's the key way in terms of avoiding further restrictions. The more people that are vaccinated and have the booster, the more protection we will all have.
OK.
Stephen Barclay, their Cabinet Office Minister. Thanks very much for your time this morning.